High Admiral Velora of the Galactic Concordat stood motionless before the grand observation window of her flagship, the Celestial Harmony. Her iridescent scales shifted through shades of deep purple as she studied the crude vessels that had appeared at the edge of Concordat space. Behind her, the bridge crew maintained a respectful silence, though she could sense their collective disdain. "These are the vessels that triggered our border alerts." She finally spoke, her translator rendering her musical language into standard galactic common. "These primitive constructions." "Yes, High Admiral." First Observer Ixel responded, bringing up a detailed scan on the main display. 5 ships of varying sizes, all showing signs of basic fusion drives and metallic hull construction. No quantum shielding, no photonic arrays, not even basic gravitic stabilizers. Velora's head crest rippled in what her species considered amusement. The vessels before her were brutish things, all sharp angles and exposed hardware, their hulls scarred and patched. They looked like they'd been cobbled together from industrial waste, rather than crafted in the pristine shipyards of a civilized race. "And they dare to approach Concordat space," she mused. "Have they transmitted any communications?" "They have, High Admiral." Ixel's scales shifted to a formal green. "They claim to represent something called the United Earth Federation and request diplomatic contact. They say they're explorers seeking peaceful relations." "Explorers?" Velora's scales flickered with barely contained mirth. "In those, they look more like mining vessels or cargo haulers that lost their way." The bridge crew shared her amusement, their scales dancing through various shades of entertainment. Only Junior Observer Kix remained serious, his scales a steady blue of concentration as he studied the scans. "High Admiral," he ventured, "if I may, these vessels show some unusual characteristics, such as their complete lack of aesthetic consideration." Velora quipped, earning another ripple of color changes from her crew. "No, High Admiral," Kix persisted. "Their power signatures, they're unusual. And their hull composition, it's unlike anything in our database." Velora waved a dismissive hand. "Of course it is. Look at them. They're probably using primitive fission reactors and whatever metals they could salvage. Hardly worth noting in our records." She turned to her communications officer. "Send them our standard warning. Tell them this sector is under Concordat protection, and they are to withdraw immediately." "They're responding," the officer reported moments later. They're requesting to know on what grounds they're being denied access to neutral space." Velora's scales shifted to a dangerous crimson. "Neutral space. This sector has been under Concordat stewardship for 10,000 cycles. The very notion that these primitives would question our authority." She straightened to her full height. "Send them our final warning. They have 1 standard cycle to withdraw or face the consequences." "High Admiral," Kix spoke again, his scales now pulsing with concern. "The readings I'm getting. These ships appear to be hardened against extreme conditions. Their hulls show signs of repeated exposure to—" "Junior Observer," Velora cut him off. "I don't need detailed analysis of primitive technology. Look at them. No quantum shields, no gravitic systems, not even basic aesthetic consideration in their design. They're clearly the product of a species barely beyond their planetary bounds. If they choose to ignore our warning, they'll learn why the Concordat has maintained peace in this sector for 10 millennia." As if in response to her dismissal, one of the Earth vessels began to move. Not the rapid, graceful acceleration of a gravitic drive, but a crude burst from fusion thrusters. The ship turned, presenting its profile to the Concordat fleet. "Are they positioning for combat?" First Observer Ixel asked incredulously. "With those vessels?" "It appears so." Velora's scales shifted to a pattern that indicated both amusement and anticipation. "Very well. If these primitives need a demonstration of proper civilized technology, we shall provide one. Signal the fleet, weapons to minimum power. We don't want to completely destroy these unfortunates, just enough to teach them their place." As the Concordat fleet began to move into attack formation, their ships graceful works of art powered by the most advanced technology in known space. Junior Observer Kix made one final attempt. "High Admiral, these ships, they're built like something meant to survive on a death world." Velora didn't even bother to respond. After all, what primitive species from a death world could possibly pose a threat to the mighty Concordat? She was about to learn the answer to that question the hard way. The Earth ships were already moving. High Admiral Velora's scales shifted from confidence to confusion as she watched the human vessels scatter. Instead of forming a defensive line or retreating, the 5 ships broke formation in seemingly random directions. Their movements were jerky, unpredictable, almost crude compared to the graceful maneuvers of Concordat vessels. "They're running," First Observer Ixel declared, his scales showing satisfaction. "As expected from primitives." "No," Junior Observer Kix countered, his scales pulsing urgent blue. "They're heading toward the maelstrom." Velora's attention snapped to the tactical display. The human vessels were indeed charging directly toward the massive stellar phenomenon that dominated this sector. A vast field of electromagnetic storms, radioactive debris, and gravitational eddies that the Concordat carefully navigated around. "Suicide, then," she declared, though her scales betrayed uncertainty. "No ship can survive in there. Even our most advanced vessels avoid direct contact with such disturbances." "High Admiral," the weapons officer called out, "we're having difficulty maintaining target lock. Their drive signatures are erratic." On the display, the human ships entered the outer edges of the maelstrom. Velora expected to see them torn apart by the fierce energies that raged there. Instead, they seemed to ride the electromagnetic waves like surfers on a cosmic ocean. Their crude hulls, rather than being destroyed, actually appeared to be channeling the energy around them. "Impossible," Ixel whispered, his scales cycling through colors of disbelief. "The radiation levels alone should be cooking their crews alive." "Their hull composition," Kix spoke up, his earlier analysis finally finding relevance. "It's not primitive at all. The layered metals, the seemingly random patches and repairs, their radiation baffles and energy dispersal systems. These ships aren't crude. They're designed to operate in conditions that would destroy our vessels." As if to prove his point, one of the human ships suddenly reversed thrust, using a violent electromagnetic surge to change direction in a way that would have torn apart the more delicate systems of a Concordat vessel. It emerged from the storm like a missile, charging straight toward the celestial harmony. "Evasive action," Velora ordered, but her flagship's graceful gravitic drives were too slow to respond. The human vessel streaked past, so close that the electromagnetic wake from its passage disrupted systems across her ship. "Multiple failures across all decks," an officer reported, scales showing panic. "Quantum shields are fluctuating, gravitic stabilizers offline." "How?" Velora demanded. "Their weapons aren't even powered." "They didn't fire on us," Kix realized aloud. "They're using the maelstrom itself as a weapon. The wake from their passage is carrying charged particles from the storm directly through our shields." More human ships emerged from the chaos, each choosing a different target. They danced through the electromagnetic turbulence like it was their natural environment, while the Concordat fleet struggled to maintain basic functions in their wake. "High Admiral," the tactical officer called out, "3 of our escort vessels are reporting critical system failures. The humans, they're herding us toward the storm's edge." Velora watched in growing horror as she realized the truth. Every evasive maneuver her fleet made to avoid the hit-and-run attacks pushed them closer to the maelstrom. The humans weren't running away. They were driving their enemies into a death trap of natural forces they couldn't hope to withstand. "All vessels, full retreat," she ordered, her scales now a solid white of fear. "Get us out of range of that storm." "The humans are pursuing," Ixel reported, his own scales matching her terror. They're surfing the electromagnetic wavefronts, using them to boost their acceleration beyond what their drives should be capable of." A massive surge of energy washed over the Concordat fleet as the human ships drove them back, their crude but effective tactics turning the very environment into a weapon. Warning signals blared across every deck as critical systems began to fail under the onslaught. "Send the surrender signal," Velora ordered, her voice hollow, "before they drive us any deeper into this hell." The human ships immediately ceased their attack, taking up flanking positions just outside the Concordat fleet's weapon range. A transmission cut through the electromagnetic interference, the human captain's voice clear despite the chaos around them. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the UEF Stormbreaker. We accept your surrender, High Admiral. Though I should warn you, this was just a small demonstration. You haven't even seen what we can do in really nasty conditions yet." Velora's scales shifted to the deep blue of resignation as she realized that everything she had dismissed as primitive was actually purpose-built for survival in conditions her species could barely comprehend. These weren't the vessels of ignorant savages. They were the tools of creatures who had evolved on a world that made even this maelstrom seem tame. What kind of species, she wondered aloud, build ships designed to survive in hell? "The kind," Junior Observer Kix answered quietly, "that considers hell to be just another Tuesday." The Emergency Council chamber of the Galactic Concordat blazed with the agitated colors of 24 high-ranking officials' scales. At the center of the chamber, a holographic display showed the latest intelligence reports from the border sectors. High Admiral Velora stood before her peers, her scales a muted gray of humiliation as she delivered her report. "The humans have established operational bases in regions we previously classified as uninhabitable," she stated. "Gas giant storms, asteroid field cores, magnetic anomalies. Environments we've always considered natural barriers are now their staging grounds." "Impossible," Sector Commander Nalf interrupted, his scales flashing skeptical purple. "No species could survive long-term exposure to such conditions." "That's what we thought." Junior Observer Kix stepped forward, now promoted after his earlier warnings had proven prescient. "Until we studied their homeworld." He brought up a new hologram, showing a planet that seemed to defy logic. Earth experiences regular catastrophic storms, massive temperature variations, intense seasonal changes, and constant tectonic activity. What we consider survival conditions, they consider mild weather. The chamber erupted in agitated color patterns as the implications sank in. "And their ships?" someone asked. "Built to withstand worse," Velora confirmed. "What we mistook for crude design is actually sophisticated environmental engineering. They don't need quantum shields or gravitic stabilizers because their hulls are designed to work with natural forces rather than against them." "But surely our superior numbers," Nalf began. A new alert flashed across the display, interrupting him. Another Concordat patrol fleet had gone dark, last reported near the Charybdis Void, a region of intense gravitational distortion. "That's the third fleet this cycle," Kix noted grimly. "They're learning to predict our patrol routes." He highlighted several sectors on the map. "Notice how they're choosing engagement zones, always in or near extreme environments. They're forcing us to fight on their terms." "We're receiving a transmission," an aide announced. "It's being broadcast from inside the void." The holographic display shifted, showing the face of a human captain. Behind her, the bridge crew worked calmly despite visible gravitational distortions that would have incapacitated most species. "Greetings, Concordat Council." Captain Chen smiled, looking remarkably comfortable for someone broadcasting from what should have been certain death. "I trust you received our message about your patrol fleet. Don't worry, we evacuated their crews before allowing the ships to be crushed. They're safe, if a bit unsettled by their experience." "What do you want?" Velora demanded, her scales betraying her unease. "Want? We tried to tell you what we wanted from the start. Peaceful diplomatic relations. You're the ones who decided we were too primitive to talk to." Chen's smile faded. "So now we're showing you exactly what primitives from a death world can do." Your patrol fleet learned some interesting lessons today about how quickly crushing gravity can compress quantum shields. Would you like to guess what other natural phenomena we've learned to weaponize? The transmission cut off, leaving the council chamber in uneasy silence. A tactical officer brought up footage from the recovered crew's suit cameras. The images showed human ships emerging from gravitational distortions like ghosts, using the very forces that should have destroyed them to mask their approach and enhance their maneuvers. They're not just surviving in these environments, Kix observed. They're turning them into weapons and fortresses. Every natural hazard we've mapped and avoided is now their territory. The psychological impact on our crews is becoming severe, Velora added. They're starting to see humans as demons, creatures that thrive in conditions that should mean death. The surviving crew from the Charybdis patrol were babbling about shadows moving in the void, about ships that appeared from nowhere and disappeared into the darkness. Because that's exactly what we've trained them to expect. A new voice spoke. The council turned to find a human diplomatic observer standing in the doorway, part of the terms of the First Fleet's surrender. You see, High Admiral, your ships are beautiful, powerful, and incredibly fragile. They're built for ideal conditions, for the safety of civilized space. Our ships, she smiled. They're built for the universe as it really is, harsh, chaotic, and unforgiving. And your crews? Nalv asked. How do they endure such conditions? Endure? The human laughed. We seek them out. Every cadet in our fleet goes through survival training in environments that would qualify as natural disasters by your standards. What you see as uninhabitable, we see as useful terrain. Those gravitational forces your patrol fleet fled from, we use them to slingshot our ships at speeds your drives can't match. Those radiation storms you avoid, perfect cover for our approach. Velora's scales shifted to a deep blue of realization. Your ships aren't weapons, she said slowly. They're survival tools. We're not fighting your technology. You're fighting our evolution. The human finished. Every primitive feature of our ships comes from lessons learned surviving on a world that tries to kill us daily. We don't need elegant solutions because we learned long ago that elegant doesn't survive. Robust survives. Adaptable survives. The council chamber's colors had shifted entirely to shades of fear and respect. They had dismissed humans as primitives because they lacked the expected markers of advanced civilization. Now they understood. Humanity's technology wasn't primitive, it was tested. Tested against conditions that would break any other species' most advanced designs. And somewhere out in the darkness of space, human ships were waiting, turning the very void itself into their hunting ground. The combined fleet of the Galactic Concordat hung in space like a constellation of artificial stars, their quantum shields casting prismatic halos around each vessel. 500 ships, the largest assembly of military power in 1,000 cycles, gathered for one purpose, to crush the human threat once and for all. High Admiral Velora stood on her new flagship's bridge, her scales rippling with determination. The celestial retribution had been specifically designed to counter human tactics, its systems hardened against electromagnetic interference, its shields reinforced against gravitational stress. Status of the containment field, she asked. Operating at full capacity, First Observer Ixel reported. We've sealed off all approach vectors through the nearby anomalies. No natural phenomena for them to exploit this time. And our new sensor arrays, calibrated to detect their hull signatures even through electromagnetic interference. They won't be able to hide in the storms this time. Velora nodded, her scales showing grim satisfaction. The Concordat had learned from its previous encounters, adapting its technology and tactics. The humans had shown them their weaknesses, and they had responded with overwhelming force and technological superiority. Contact. The sensor officer's scales flashed urgent blue. Multiple human signatures detected. They're coming straight at us. The tactical display showed 30 human vessels approaching in a tight formation. No attempt at stealth, no clever use of natural cover. just a direct approach against overwhelming odds. They must realize it's hopeless, Ixal said. Even with their environmental advantages, they can't possibly. He never finished the sentence. The human fleet suddenly accelerated to impossible speeds, their fusion drives flaring far beyond safe operational limits. Impossible. The engineering officer's scales stroked with panic. Those acceleration forces should be tearing their ships apart. That's exactly what they're doing. Kix's voice cut through the chaos. He'd been studying human tactics since their first encounter. Look at their hull readings. They're deliberately pushing their systems past the breaking point. Velora watched in horrified fascination as the human ships began to shed outer hull plates, leaving trails of debris in their wake. But instead of crippling them, each discarded piece of their ships made them faster, more maneuverable. Evasive action, she ordered, but it was too late. The human fleet split apart, each ship now moving independently, surrounded by clouds of their own deliberately discarded hull plating. The debris, superheated from the friction of their insane acceleration, scattered across space like artificial meteors. They're turning their own ships into shrapnel. Ixal realized too late. The human fleet split apart, each ship now moving independently, surrounded by clouds of their own deliberately discarded hull plating. The debris, superheated from the friction of their insane acceleration, scattered across space like artificial meteors. They're turning their own ships into shrapnel. Ixal realized too late. The Concordat's sophisticated shields, designed to stop energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, struggled to track and deflect thousands of fragments of human hull material. Each piece carried its own electromagnetic signature, confusing targeting systems and overwhelming defensive computers. Multiple impacts across the fleet, the damage control officer reported, scales showing pure white panic. The debris, it's not just random fragments. Each piece has been engineered to carry through our shields at specific frequencies. Velora watched as her carefully positioned fleet dissolved into chaos. Human ships, now stripped down to their essential systems, darted between their larger vessels like predatory fish. Without their outer hulls weighing them down, their acceleration and maneuverability exceeded anything the Concordat's computers had predicted possible. They're inside our formation, Kix reported grimly, using our own ships as shields against our heavy weapons. A human vessel flashed past the bridge viewport, giving Velora a clear view of its exposed inner workings. The ship's core systems were clearly designed to operate without its outer hull, the crew protected by multiple redundant layers of emergency shielding. What had seemed like primitive construction was actually a deliberate design philosophy. Ships that could sacrifice their own components in combat and keep fighting. Fall back, Velora ordered. Regroup and... The space around her fleet suddenly lit up as the humans revealed their true strategy. The debris field they'd created wasn't just for defense. It was a trap. Thousands of hull fragments, carefully positioned during their attack run, detonated in synchronized sequence. Each explosion was relatively small, but together they created a cascading wave of force that trapped the Concordat fleet in a web of destructive resonance. They'd weaponized their own ship's destruction, Kix whispered in awe. Everything we thought was primitive or crude about their design was actually part of their combat strategy. Their ships aren't just built to survive hell. They're built to create it. The human fleet regrouped, their stripped-down vessels taking up attack positions around the reeling Concordat Armada. A transmission cut through the chaos, displaying Captain Chen's face on every Concordat ship's command screen. Your containment field was impressive, she said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. But you still don't understand. We don't need natural phenomena to fight you. We can create our own environmental hazards. Now about those diplomatic relations we wanted to discuss. Velora looked at her fleet, trapped in a cage of human engineering turned into weaponry, and finally understood. The humans hadn't just adapted to survive in hostile conditions. They had learned to become the hostile conditions. Her scales shifted to the deep blue of total surrender as she gave the order that would change the balance of power forever. "Open a channel," she said quietly. "It's time we learned to talk to the people who turned survival into an art form." One cycle after the Battle of the Shattered Fleet, High Admiral Velora stood in Earth's orbit, watching through the observation deck as storms rolled across the planet's surface. Her scales shifted through shades of wonder and terror as lightning illuminated hurricane clouds larger than some Concordat cities. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Captain Chen approached, offering a beverage Velora had come to know as coffee. "That storm system's been building for days. Should be quite a show when it makes landfall. Your people will evacuate the affected areas." Velora's scales showed concern. "Some will. Others will stay to surf the waves or chase the storm." Chen smiled at Velora's color flash of shock. "That's what you still don't quite understand about us. We don't just survive extremes. We embrace them. Every hostile environment is a challenge to overcome, every natural disaster an opportunity to adapt." They watched as a group of small ships descended into the storm system. Velora recognized them as atmospheric research vessels, deliberately flying into conditions that would tear apart most spacecraft. "The same principles that guide our shipbuilding came from centuries of dealing with Earth's moods," Chen explained. "When your world tries to kill you regularly, you learn to build things that bend instead of break, that can sacrifice outer layers to protect core systems, that use the force of the destruction itself as a tool. Like your ships in the battle," Velora understood, "turning their own destruction into a weapon." "Exactly. Your ships are designed to maintain their perfect form at all costs. Ours are designed to adapt, even if that means losing parts of themselves. It's not about surviving at any cost. It's about understanding that survival sometimes requires transformation." The observation deck darkened as the station's orbit took them into Earth's night side. Below, the storm's lightning created a spectacular display against the darkness. "We've begun implementing some of your design philosophies," Velora admitted. "Not just in our ships, but in our thinking. The Concordat spent millennia trying to impose order on a chaotic universe. You've shown us how to work with that chaos instead. And we're learning from you too," Chen nodded. "Your quantum shield technology, once we stopped trying to make it perfect and allowed it to be adaptable, has helped us develop new protective systems. Turns out elegance and resilience aren't mutually exclusive." A proximity alert sounded, and both officers turned to watch a Concordat ship emerge from FTL nearby. Its design was radically different from the crystalline perfection of traditional Concordat vessels, more angular, with layered hull sections that could be jettisoned if needed. Not quite human engineering, but not purely Concordat either. "The adaptive class," Velora said with pride, her scales showing deep satisfaction. "Our first joint development project. Beautiful, isn't it?" "In its own way," Chen agreed. "Though I notice you kept some of the aesthetic touches. Those hull patterns aren't just for show, are they?" "No," Velora's scales showed amusement. "They're heat dissipation channels, designed to handle atmospheric entry. But we saw no reason they couldn't be beautiful as well as functional. Perhaps that's the real lesson we've learned from each other, that adaptation doesn't mean abandoning who we are, just understanding better who we can become." Below them, the storm began to dissipate, leaving behind transformed landscapes and new patterns of life. Much like the conflict that had brought their species together, it had changed everything it touched. Not destroying, but reshaping, creating new possibilities from the intersection of force and resilience. "The Concordat Council is still arguing about reopening the Forbidden Zones," Velora said. "Those regions we deemed too dangerous for development. Let me guess, now that they've seen how we operate in extreme conditions, they're reconsidering what too dangerous means." "Indeed. Though we're approaching it differently now. Not trying to tame these regions, but learning to work with their natural forces, as humans do." Velora's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue. "It's remarkable how seeing something from a new perspective can transform it from a threat into an opportunity." That's humanity's greatest trick, Chen smiled. We're not actually fearless, and we're certainly not invincible. We've just learned to see challenges differently. Every problem is a potential tool, every disaster a chance to adapt and grow stronger. A group of human cadets passed through the observation deck, heading for their training exercises. Velora watched them go, remembering how she'd once dismissed their species as primitive. Now she understood. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their resilience, but their perspective. They didn't just survive in a hostile universe. They found ways to thrive in it, to turn its very hostility into advantage. To adaptation, Chen raised her coffee cup. To understanding, Velora replied, her scales showing the deep gold of new wisdom. And to learning that sometimes the most primitive solution is the most elegant, if you're brave enough to embrace it. As Earth turned beneath them, storms and sunshine chasing each other across its surface, two species who had begun as enemies watched together, each seeing the universe through newly opened eyes. In the end, that was humanity's true gift to the galaxy, not just the ability to survive, but the courage to see opportunity in adversity, to greet the universe's dangers with innovation and determination. And somewhere in the darkness of space, human and Concordat ships patrolled together, their different approaches to survival making them stronger together than either could have been alone.